And now to our local stories. Tasmanians have been hearing for months about a moratorium on logging in high conservation value forests. But it would appear very little has actually changed on the ground in the forests since peace talks first began in October. Environment groups involved in the talks are becoming anxious as their memberships turn up the heat demanding action. As 7:30's Fiona Breen reports, despite having been ordered by its minister to start winding back operations, Forestry Tasmania appears to be in no hurry, citing contracts it just can't break.
It's been a week since the so-called new moratorium was signed into existence, but it's an agreement that still allows logging in areas considered to be of high conservation value.
That we will continue to advocate for these forests. Huon Valley Environment Centre and Still Wild Still Threatened will continue to mobilise people to be on the ground in the forest to keep truth in this debate that there is high conservation value forests falling that could be protected.
Forestry Tasmania's business as usual approach for the past 5 months, while the forest peace talks have been underway, has angered the conservation movement. But only frontline activists have publicly demonstrated. They believe the original agreement made it clear that March 15th was the deadline for an end to logging in forests like the Tarkine.
We were aware that Forestry Tasmania for the past 3 months were pushing in new roads on the ground, speaking to people in the community saying there is no moratorium, we're working with business as usual.
The environmental groups taking part in the talks bit their tongues, but they were fuming. Under pressure from their membership, they needed evidence Forestry Tasmania was starting to pull contractors out of disputed areas.
What we had over that 3-month period was absolutely no action from Forestry Tasmania to put that moratorium in place. So it's now 3 months late and we're still having logging activities occurring in those ancient forests and ongoing conflict as a result of that.
Conservationists say it wasn't until they were ordered by the Forest Minister, Brian Green, just days before March 15th, that Forestry Tasmania was forced to start considering a moratorium.
It did take a letter from your minister to get you to come to the table to talk about the moratorium, though, didn't it?
That's not true at all. I'm not sure where you got that from.
Well, that's what everyone's saying.
Well, they might be, but we've been talking to the ENGOs constantly for the last year about this.
Late last week, with environmentalists threatening to pull out, independent negotiator Bill Kelty asked Forestry's Managing Director Bob Gordon to meet all the parties, and an 11th hour agreement was reached. A moratorium in high conservation forests for 6 months came into effect. A week later, the pressure is still building as environmentalists wait for action from Forestry Tasmania.
From a conservation perspective, the critical thing for us is that that moratorium on logging in those ancient forests earmarked for protection in new national parks and reserves needs to come into place yesterday.
Forestry Tasmania's chief, Bob Gordon, skirted around questions on whether or not there has been or will be a halt to logging in any of the disputed areas.
I'll just refer back to my previous answer. The ENGOs in December last year said it wasn't their intention to move any contractors that were currently engaged in those coops out of them.
Well, transferred to other coops, out of work.
I'm just going back to what they said in December. I've got the Mercury article here, which quotes them if you want to read it, which said that it wasn't their intention to move contractors out of the coops they were currently engaged in. They may have changed their mind, but that's what they said back in December. And that's what we took them to mean.
The groups involved, even the signatories on that statement of principles, are expecting that workers will get out of high conservation forests or the forests on that list within the next 6 months.
That's what some of the NGOs' expectation is. I think some of the other parties have different expectations.
Under the new agreement, all parties were to be absolutely committed to end logging in high conservation areas unless existing contracts had to be met.
It's not really a moratorium then, is it, in the true sense of the word?
I thought moratorium was a delay.
Well, a temporary cessation.
That's correct.
Yes, so you're not ceasing anything, are you?
I think on the numbers that we provided, something like 98% of the area will have no impact at all in the next 6-month period.
Rather than talk about pulling back logging operations, Bob Gordon was keen to focus on his charge that environmentalists had changed their maps on high conservation areas, slowing the process down.
Well, there are a whole lot that weren't on the list recently that now are on the list because the map got changed substantially 2 weeks ago. And that's caused us an even larger problem because some of the regrowth areas that were potentially able to be moved into, which at that time were out of the map they gave us, they've suddenly changed the map and put them back in the map.
Conservationists say the changes were made after they received data from Forestry Tasmania and all of the signatories signed off on the deal.
And that's quite disingenuous. It's always been clear that the mapped areas for protection would need to go through a process of refinement and tidying up the boundaries for a final set of proposed reserves.
With what appears to be a stalemate, it's no surprise there's confusion across the Tasmanian community. Many people have been contacting local parliamentarians for clarification, and that's prompted a Legislative Council inquiry.
And there's a lot of confusion about the HGV forest process, just what is high value conservation areas and what is not. So we intend to, that will obviously be part of the discussions.
The chair of the committee, Greg Hall, believes it's time to bring the secret negotiations out into the public arena.
There had to be a starting point, and I'm not going back down a blame game there. I think there had to be a starting point, and I think that was fair enough. But I think now is the time that we've got to some crucial stages that we have to actually shed that light.
The inquiry isn't due to start for another month. In that time, the talks could fall over. Some environmental groups claim Forestry Tasmania is trying to spoil the talks. Environment Tasmania says it's taking on a political role outside its duty as a government business.
There has been a small section of the timber industry that is stuck in the old ways, that does want to do things in the old ways that have characterised the last 30 years of conflict, and they have been pursuing a deliberate strategy of delay and obfuscation in the hope and attempt to knock this process over.
Do you not want an agreement to happen? Are you FT being a spoiler?
That would be completely inconsistent with our actions for last year. We're on the public record at least 5 or 6 times as saying we support the parties getting together to negotiate agreement.